Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. So good to be back with you on this Monday afternoon, Monday evening, perhaps where you are. Perhaps it's Tuesday morning. If you're on the other side of the date line, welcome wherever you are. We're so glad you're here with us. And if you're watching online, as many people do around the world, if you're watching the video streaming in the various places it streams, you see that they redid the studio. We got a brand new look here in the studio, and you can see it. I look completely different. Well, I think I'm the only thing that looks the same. Same sad old situation there, but everything around me looks new and improved. So, if you're listening on the radio, maybe check it out later. You can see it over at our Facebook page. I'm sure they'll have a bunch of posts. A bunch of people were in here taking photographs a few moments ago, so I'm sure they're taking those to post them somewhere. And not only do we have a new and improved studio for you, man, great Monday show, a great Monday show. Second hour, we'll talk to atheists. Trent Horn will be here, and if you are an atheist person and you'd like to talk to believers, like to maybe convince us of the atheism, or at least share your view of why atheism makes more sense than belief in God, you're welcome to call. Second hour, those are always fun hours, and we really do look forward to your calls. Please don't hesitate to call. We love those conversations. They're good for all of us. This hour, we'll do the church in the news, and if you've got questions about the church in the news, you are welcome to call 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884, and if you're going to do the church in the news, then you call J.D. Flynn and have him on, and he's been gracious enough to come and do this hour with us. He's the editor-in-chief and the co-founder of The Pillar, which you can find at pillarcatholic.com. Before co-founding The Pillar, J.D. was the editor-in-chief of the Catholic News Agency. Before that, chancellor of the Archdiocese of Denver, and he's got an MA in theology. He's got the JCL, which is that canon law degree, and he's a super journalist. J.D. Flynn, thanks for being with us.
And I don't know if you know this, Cy, but I am an admiral in the Navy of the great state of Nebraska. Nobody ever mentions that one.
Congratulations on that. That must be quite an active Navy. I don't know what.
Yeah, we haven't had a meeting yet or anything that I know, so I don't know if it's a good Navy. But it's like being a Kentucky colonel, but it's way, way, way better because it's admiral.
Yeah, well, a colonel does outrank an admiral does outrank a colonel. So congratulations on that. That is fantastic. The Navy of the Plains, as it's affectionately called.
Indeed. So something for you to shoot for too. I mean, it's not if you can dream it, Cy, you can do it.
I don't know. JD, I'm not convinced of that anymore because I have dreamed some stuff and I couldn't do it. So I'm not convinced of that. I know that's the American dream, but I am no longer convinced. Our number is 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. If you have a question about the church and the news, this is your hour. J.D. Flynn here with us, maybe once a month or even less than that. So we don't get him all the time. If you want to ask what's going on, this is the place to call, 888-318-7884. I read The Pillar, JD, at pillarcatholic.com, and I note that the Vatican is building a bigger courtroom. Is this supposed to make some miscreants nervous? Is this a signal? Like we ain't playing around anymore?
Well, we'll find out. So there is I think probably there are some people who are a little bit nervous about that. The courtroom that is being built is a courtroom for the criminal trial, the criminal tribunal of the Vatican City State. So you've got a lot of courts over there at the Vatican. You've got the Apostolic Signatura and the Roman Rota, and the Apostolic Penitentiary has a little judicial process. So you have a lot of sort of Vatican courts, but the one that's building a new courtroom is the criminal court for the Vatican City State. This is like not if you're accused of committing a canon law crime, but just a straight up crime, an ordinary civil crime inside the Vatican City State, which is, as you know, an ordinary functioning country,
right?
Even while it's not as large as other countries, any other countries, in fact, being the smallest sovereign entity in the world, is an ordinary functioning country with criminal law just like any other, and is anticipating, some big trials coming up, some big criminal trials coming up. So you probably know that there is a sprawling investigation into the administration of money, the financial administration of the Vatican Secretariat of State, that there's a lot of questions about seemingly shady investments, and that some people have been charged already with embezzlement and money laundering and a whole host of other such things. And it's kind of in anticipation of that, it seems, that the Vatican City State's Judiciary Section has begun building a new courtroom, a bigger courtroom, because they're expecting a big crowd for the possibility of some of these trials. So it's just one of those things where it's like you don't think about the fact that there are these very practical things that have to be done in the administration of justice anywhere, and especially in the life of the church. But that's the way it goes. They had to get some room.
But Pope Francis is not playing around about getting the Vatican cleaned up. I mean, it's not an easy job. I'm not saying he's going to get it done in 5 minutes, but he's showing signs of being quite serious.
Yeah, Pope Francis has been very, very diligent about addressing issues of financial reform in the Vatican. And he said at the very beginning of his papacy that he was serious about that. And you probably remember that back in 2014, he appointed Cardinal George Pell as kind of like the finance czar of the Vatican. And Cardinal Pell's job was to essentially modernize a very sort of old-fashioned system of financial administration, the kind of system of financial administration that leaves itself open to all kinds of misconduct by bad actors, or even just kind of to the kind of negligence that can cost you a lot of money because it doesn't have sort of checks and balances built in, spending thresholds, audits, these kinds of things. So since the beginning of his papacy, Pope Francis has said that he wants very, very seriously to modernize the sort of financial operations of the Vatican. And part of that is cleaning up corruption. Just the sort of, mucking out the stables is not a pleasant thing. And there are some embedded kind of, it seems clear that now that there's some embedded ways of doing things that leave room for corruption, and that the Vatican Prosecutor's Office is now investigating some very serious charges of corruption. And the Pope has been changing laws kind of in the past few months. The Pope has been changing laws of criminal procedure with some frequency to kind of set up the Vatican City State's criminal tribunal to better try financial crimes. And so he's been making a lot of little changes to law that cumulatively add up to a pretty big deal.
Our number 888-318-7884. Your question doesn't have to be about the Vatican, but if you've got a question about the church in the news, you are welcome to call 888-318-7884. So the headlines still continue to be discouraging on the financial side, though, and you just wonder about some of this. There's a gentleman arrested, Torzi, I believe is his last name, in London recently on charges having to do with the mismanagement of Vatican funds. There's some question about, is the Vatican invested in a company that makes the morning after pill? Can you give us kind of the summation of what all this is about?
Yeah, and I challenge the idea that the headlines are discouraging, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
That arrest that you mentioned, this businessman named Gianluigi Torzi was arrested in London, and Gianluigi Torzi is kind of this fellow who's in the middle of this sort of sprawling Vatican financial scandal. He's a broker who the Holy See says has committed tax evasion, fraud, money laundering, and extortion, and has been kind of chasing after him for quite some time. Well. I think it's good news that he was arrested in London, and I think it's good news that we know that the Vatican is chasing these things. I think it's good news that he might face a trial, because I don't think, Cy, that kind of financial crime or financial misconduct is anything new. I think the new news, the story, is that the way it's being handled is changing so dramatically that you would see an arrest. That's a serious sign of reform. That's a sign of administration, a jurisdictional administration that takes seriously addressing these crimes. So I look at something like that as a serious sign of reform. I look at the thing that you just mentioned, that there have been this question about very seriously unethical investments, the possibility of very serious unethical investments at the Vatican City State. And this was alleged by someone who had previously been in an auditor position inside the Apostolic See. Well, he alleged that the Holy See had in its portfolio some pharmaceutical companies that manufactured the morning after pill. And he also said, though, and here's the good news, that as soon as he reported it to his bosses, the Holy See sold the stock. So someone had bought the stock, and that in itself is problematic. But as soon as they knew about it, the Holy See sold the stock. And here's the other piece of good news. Right after that, the Pope introduced new policies that seem very basic to us. I think probably many dioceses in this country have it, but for Rome were a big step forward. The Pope introduced a requirement for a sort of ethical investment policy, where things that the Holy See might invest in would have to be scrutinized for the degree to which they uphold the gospel of life, the degree to which they uphold the rights of workers, the degree to which they recognize human rights. And that's a big step forward for the Holy See. So again, I see these things coming to light as not only the possibility of reform, but we see these sort of changes that point to reform happening in real time. I'm excited about that.
Oh, I really appreciate that take, JD. 888-318-7884, our number. You're welcome to call if you have questions about the church and the news. When we come back, I do have to take a quick break, JD. I just want to ask you about what everybody seems to be talking about, the U.S. bishops and their struggles to come to some conclusion about what to do about Catholic politicians in public life who are openly advocating for a broad abortion license. So I'll ask you about that when we come back. And you're welcome to call JD with your questions, 888-318-7884. The 20 Answers Summer Reading Challenge continues. You can get all 44 books in the Catholic Answers 20 Answers collection, books, 20 answers on Jesus, on baptism, on the sacraments, the other sacraments, on everything from Mormonism to Jehovah's Witnesses to the Bible, the whole gamut. You get a great education in Catholic apologetics in these 44 books. You can get all 44 books when you buy them in a set at 70% off. 70% off right now at shop.catholic.com.
Catholic Answers Live.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
EWTN podcasts are the perfect companion for busy Catholics everywhere. Your favorite EWTN programs are waiting for you to listen to on your time. With on-demand access to audio, you can pause and pick up right where you left off, anytime, anywhere. Just subscribe by using your mobile device's free podcast app. Find old favorites or discover something new. EWTN podcasts. They're waiting for you.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. J.D. Flynn, Ed Condon are the founders of The Pillar, a wonderful, relatively new resource for Catholic news. You can find it at pillarcatholic.com. J.D. Flynn is our guest this hour, taking your questions on the church in the news. He claimed earlier that he's an admiral in the Navy of the state of Nebraska. I am skeptical, but very pleased that you've made that rank.
I did, and in fact, I just got a text from a great friend in Nebraska, my friend Mike Foley, who mentioned, I think he's probably a Nebraska admiral too. So thanks for reaching out, sir. It's a fine fellowship to be in, the great Navy of the state of Nebraska.
Well, that's I personally coined the phrase the Navy of the Prairie. So I feel like I should get.
I think you should trademark that right now and start selling us T-shirts.
I think I could sell one to you. And I'm not even sure you would buy it.
Oh, if you make it, I'll take it tonight.
All right. It's $1,000. Our number is 888-318-7884. J.D. Flynn, our guest, and I am going to go to the call. So callers, hang on. I'm going to get to you, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask about this. You maybe know this, J.D., but a couple of weeks ago, Archbishop Cordileone from San Francisco came on our air to announce this new pastoral initiative he has to educate people about the Eucharist, to remind people about receiving the Eucharist in a state of grace, and to discuss the situation of politicians who openly and repeatedly advocate for a broad abortion license, but also present themselves for communion. This, it seems to me, the Archbishop said, and I'm sure that this is true, this is part of a long meditation of his own about how to address this in his archdiocese, but it also seems to me that it's part of a larger thing that's leading towards June when the bishops will meet, and then they'll meet again in November. Can you just tell us what the situation is in the United States when it comes to bishops, communion, and public officials who advocate abortion?
Well, yeah, it's a great question, and I think it has been on everybody's mind, especially leading up to the June meeting of the U.S. Bishops' Conference. There at that meeting, the bishops have been expected to vote on the possibility of a statement on this question of Eucharistic coherence, the question of pro-choice politicians receiving Holy Communion. And I think they're still expected to vote on the possibility of that statement. Now, that doesn't mean that they're voting on the text, just that they're voting on, it's kind of, you got to love Episcopal parliamentary procedure. They're voting on the prospect of drafting the text, and then subsequently at another meeting, they'll vote on the text itself. So,
do they have to vote on whether they can vote first? I mean, we're
at the very least, we're going to need a motion and a second before they can vote on whether they're going to vote, for sure, to be sure. So they're starting this process, this discussion, and I think a lot of bishops have said they think that's a good thing. and bishops have weighed in different ways, with pastoral letters, with statements. A few bishops now have taken to the pages of magazines like America Magazine to sort of weigh in with their view on things. And you can see shaping up a number of bishops who are saying, we think it's important that Catholics who advocate for positions that are contrary to the gospel of life, that are contrary to the dignity of life, not just abortion, but other positions that are contrary to the dignity of life, should not approach Holy Communion. And we recognize that the Church's canon law, the law of the Church, says that pro-choice politicians can be prohibited from receiving Holy Communion. Now, there are other bishops who have since weighed in and said, well, that's kind of a weaponization of the Eucharist, or that kind of makes too political the Eucharist. And then this first group of bishops says, well, this is, this goes back to St. Paul saying, that if we eat and drink the body and blood of Christ unworthily, we eat and drink our own condemnation. The thing has gotten a little bit more attention lately because Cardinal Ladaria, who is the head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith in Rome, sent a letter last week to the U.S. bishops, and that letter urged them to it didn't say they shouldn't do this, and it said that they should kind of rely on the Church's teaching on this, the Church's law and teaching, which makes clear that a person who's advocating for things that are contrary to the teaching of the Church should not approach Holy Communion. But it did urge the bishops to what he called pious and serene reflection, and to try to reach unanimity on this. And this has kind of been a frequent refrain of the Holy See lately, like urging the bishops not to move away from the doctrine of the Church. I don't think Cardinal Ladaria's letter was saying that at all, although some people have interpreted it that way, but rather to pray more before they speak. And I don't think anybody who is a believer in the gospel of Jesus Christ thinks that the notion of praying more before they speak is a bad idea. So Ladaria's letter has been I've sort of said it's kind of like an ink blot. People are interpreting it in lots and lots of different ways. But if you read the actual text of the letter, which we published at the Pillar, you'll see that he's urging the bishops to lean more deeply into the teachings of the Church and to pray more and to try to reach unity before they speak on these things. I'm not sure that's not good advice, altogether.
J.D. Flynn, our guest, our number 888-318-7884. If you have questions about the Church and the news, I have a whole bunch more that I've got listed here for J.D., but I do want to let callers get their questions in. So I'm going to go to line 3. Okay, line 3, Mark in Prairie Province in Canada, listening on AveMariaRadio.net. Mark, glad to have you. Go ahead with your question for J.D. Flynn.
Yeah, I appreciate your Prairie Navy. That's near and dear to my heart. I love the ocean. It's great.
Well, consider enlisting.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know if Canada has a similar thing. We should kind of form an alliance quickly.
Well, yeah, I think we should. Yeah, we should probably piggyback off of that. So, anyways, my question has to do with like news and Facebook in particular. And my question is, why do Catholics continue to use and more insidiously promote Facebook to connect people and to show content and in particular pictures and videos? So why do Catholics continue to use that? And I can cite examples of for example, when you were indicating that you have images of your new studio, well, it's going to be on Facebook. Well, poor schleps like me don't have Facebook, I guess we're yeah, so it's person of goodwill, and also even my church, continue to promote the use of Facebook by having video masses on there. And this is basically just fueling a multi-billion-dollar corporation that is just feeding off of people's personal and private information.
Okay, Mark, I'm going to let JD take a shot at that. It's a powerful objection.
It's a great question. It's an interesting question. They always say if you don't know what the product is, you're the product. And that could certainly be said about Facebook, which, as you say, basically is in the business of learning as much as it possibly can about us and then selling ads and monetizing that information in any number of ways. So you're not wrong about that at all, Mark. I think that's a fair point. I was thinking a little bit about, and I'm not a scripture scholar by any stretch of the imagination, but I was just thinking a little bit about St. Paul at the Areopagus, right? I mean, going to a place that was a kind of a mix of conversations of a variety of kinds, and even going to a place where there was a great deal of pagan worship, and going there in a very deliberative way to preach Christ crucified. And I wonder, in many ways, social media is becoming the contemporary public square for a lot of people, and it's not a public square that is pure or clean or holy or good in many, many ways, I think, some of which you're identifying. Now, of course, there's the potential in social media to be in touch with people who are not often in touch with, and to have, maybe more regular contact with family members and things like that. But there are limitations to those things. And I think we also have to be aware, as you probably point out, of even kind of the neurological impact of social media and the kind of conditioning that comes along with sort of like the self-branding and fishing for likes and things like that come with social media. So you're not wrong about any of that. I think that's right. I do think there's a value of being in a place where people are, and a place where people rather sorely need the gospel, which is everywhere, right? I mean, people everywhere need the gospel, and social media is one of those places where we have the ability, I hope, to find ways to give some proclamation of the gospel. But the church has this thing every year called World Communications Day, and they give a little message about kind of the state of communications in the world. And a few of them, a few years back, were on social media. And I recall, I think it was in the pontificate of Benedict XVI, and so social media was still developing, but not nearly as ubiquitous as it is now. And I recall the Holy Father saying that the online encounter can be a good thing, and online relationships can be a good thing, but they themselves should not be viewed as sort of being complete, that they should call us into the kind of personal encounter which is truly and uniquely human. And certainly we can see that with like what's happened with the Mass over the last year. People have the idea that kind of watching Mass online or on TV is the same as being at Mass. Well, it's not. I mean, it's not in any sense, theologically, spiritually, humanly, personally. It's a good devotion perhaps, but it's not in any way sort of the spiritual sense of assisting at Holy Mass. And so the point that the Holy Father made, and again, I think I can't quite remember when that was, but the point that the Holy Father made was that these online relationships and this online proclamation of the gospel should be ordered towards calling people into human and authentic relationships with each other, including relationships of prayer and the relationship with our Lord in a more a human way, and most especially in a more sacramental way. Yeah, I mean, I think there's some value to being in these places where people are, and I think there's some scriptural, forerunners to that. And at the same time, always to call us into something deeper and something more real, and living in reality is living in Christ and living in the sacraments. And so I do think you're right that it should be a call out instead of just sort of an acceptance of, if that makes sense.
Mark, thanks very much for the call. I hope that was helpful and satisfying to you. I don't know how much you get this in your end of the business, JD, but we here at Catholic Answers, I ask the marketing people every now and then, how does Facebook treat you? And they're not treated well by Facebook. Posts that we want to make are, held up because somebody has to review them. And this is basic Catholic stuff. We're not doing, some kind of radical new vision of the world. But it's true that the social media companies, I think, have a modern secular view. And many of them are, I think, engineers, and they don't have a wholesome education in humanities, and they come across Catholic ideas and they think that they're utterly foreign and that they have to somehow protect the world from what we're saying.
Yeah, I think that's right. And we at the Pillar, maybe I guess we're too little to be on anybody's radar, maybe, but I certainly have had that experience in other apostolates, and I know other Catholic apostolates have too, where it's clear that some of the proclamation of the gospel seems foreign, or even is seen to be an offense on social media, and this is a real and serious problem. But it's also evidence of the profound differences between the technocratic worldview and the Christian worldview, and if that's true, I don't think it's enough for us just to say, well, the technocracy into which we're headed is a sure path to hell, and so to hell with it. I don't think that's sufficient. Instead, I think we have to say, well, if this is true, all the more reason for us to plunge in there with the redemptive, with the redemptive message of the gospel.
Amen, brother. All right, let's go to John in McKinney, Texas, listening on the new and improved Catholic Answers Live app. John, go ahead with your question for J.D. Flynn.
Just have a short question. It's we were talking about the expansion of the court at the Vatican recently, and I wondered, does the Vatican have a prison?
Oh, it's a good question. The Vatican City State has holding cells. If you are I don't know. if you were acting in a seriously disorderly way inside, let's say, a mass, if you were invited to an audience inside, like, let's say, Politics Hall, and then you were acting in a very seriously disorderly way and you were taken away by the Swiss guards, this is becoming a weird situation now, but it could happen, I suppose. Not to you. You seem like a nice guy. But if you were acting disorderly in Politics Hall and taken away by the Swiss guards, you would be put into a Vatican City State holding cell. And if you were maybe intoxicated inside Vatican City State, you might be in that holding cell long enough to sort of dry out, as it were. But if you were going to serve any serious time, and if you were going to be held for a couple of days, actually you'd be held inside one of the residences in Vatican City State with a guard outside the door. But if you're going to do any serious time for a Vatican City State crime, you do it in an Italian prison. The Vatican City State and Italy have a concordat, a treaty that covers a lot of different aspects of sort of the relationship. And one of those things is the prison exchange agreement.
So it's not a, Las Vegas, they take you out in the desert situation, John, but yeah, you can do time in an Italian prison. So in case you were planning any Vatican crimes there, John, now you have your answer. J.D. Flynn's here with us. It's Church in the News this hour. If you got questions about the Church in the News, 888-318-7884.
We'll be right back with more Catholic Answers Live.
Here's a question. Is it really possible to be friends with someone who died 2,000 years ago? Maybe the problem is that we've grown way too comfortable with the story of Jesus. Nice man, right? Taught us to love one another, said not to judge people. We celebrate his birthday every year. It's time to put away this small, safe version of Jesus, says Cy Kellett. Nobody that bland could have transformed the world. In A Teacher of Strange Things, Cy presents Jesus Christ undiluted by sentiment, with all his radical words and deeds uncensored. Do you know someone, your son or daughter perhaps, or maybe your mom or dad, who needs the friendship of Jesus Christ? Do you? Order your copy of A Teacher of Strange Things by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
According to divine command, we should give God worship, but how do we know if we're doing it right? Is worship a form of self-help? To make me feel better? A form of social activism, or even a commodity? Or is it something that transcends all of those? In Real Religion, How to Avoid False Faith and Worship God in Spirit and Truth, Father Jeff Kirby cuts through the misguided modern notions about God and religion and takes you back to the foundation for true worship, God's revelation about himself. From his first contact with his chosen people to the culmination of his revelation in Jesus Christ, God shows us what religion is supposed to be like and how to make the practice of it a lifelong virtue in our lives. Order your copy of Real Religion by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. J.D. Flynn, our guest. I had like a million questions I was going to ask him, and now I can't get to any of them because there's so many callers want to ask questions. But that is all right. We'll just keep having J.D. on. J.D. is the editor-in-chief and co-founder of The Pillar. You can find it at pillarcatholic.com, a wonderful, just now flowering website for finding Catholic news from all around the world. And J.D. knows everybody in every Catholic church around the world. As a matter of fact, is that not true? Am I exaggerating?
No, I mean,
I'm exaggerating your
I'm close.
Okay. All right. So St. Peter's Parish in Mwanza, Tanzania. Can you name the pastor there?
Oh gosh, he used to be a buddy of mine, but he got transferred, so I don't know.
He used to be a buddy of mine. I don't know. I've lost faith in you, JD. All right, let's have more caller questions. That's all right?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, Chris in Chesapeake, Virginia, watching on Facebook Live. Now I feel bad about the whole Facebook thing. We're there.
Areopagus, man.
All right. Okay. Right. Chris, go ahead with your question for JD.
Well, first off, don't feel bad because that's how I found you guys. It's great. So I appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Chris.
Awesome. Well, thanks for taking my call. So I wish I had a little bit more of a specific question regarding Church in the News, but this is an underlying question which might touch, I guess, maybe a couple or a few. So as you know, the Pope's statements always seem to be mistakenly confused by a lot of people as being stated infallibly. And so, like, looking into this, I've found that church teaching is broken down into doctrine, dogma, and discipline. So within this context, I'm wondering as to, like, what is the proper way to understand things like the Pope's statements and Catholic social teaching, even things like who can receive the Eucharist, and like what is the ultimate hook of authority upon which to hang our hats as Catholics? Because, this is my last thing I'll say, as a Catholic, I've got a lot of non-Catholic friends who love Jesus a lot, but what's unshakable to me is that I know that 2,000 years the Church has been through so much corruption, but has made it through with the teaching remaining pure. So just to bring it back a little bit of clarity, I've heard it, the church teaching being broken down into doctrine, dogma, and discipline. And so I'm wondering what lens or understanding is the proper way to view things like the Pope's statements, Catholic social teaching, and other things of that nature.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. It's a broad question, Chris, and therefore I'm afraid I suppose I have to give you a broad answer, which is, would that I would be able to kind of treat each one of those things, but that would probably be a dissertation instead of a radio show. But it's true that the Pope speaks in a variety of ways, right? And it's not true just to Pope Francis, but it's true of the whoever it is that's occupying the chair of St. Peter. It is true that the Pope speaks in a variety of different ways. There are times when the Pope is speaking by definition, by intention, in an authoritative and infallible way to declare and clarify some dogmatic truth, which is to be believed by Catholics. There are times when the Pope is teaching in an authoritative way that binds us to give a belief. There are times when the Pope is teaching in an authoritative way which binds us to give our assent to hold something, not necessarily to believe it, but to hold it to be true. And then there are times when the Pope teaches in ways that impact the life of the Church, and so it's authoritative not in a sense of sort of teaching ministry, but in terms of the Pope's governing ministry, which doesn't bind us to believe. It's perfectly legitimate if the Pope makes a law for us to say, "Oh, I think that's a bad law. I don't like that law." Nevertheless, be obliged to. Nevertheless, be obliged to believe it to act upon it because it is indeed an aspect of the Pope's governing ministry. At the same time, the Pope also teaches when he's sort of preaching or writing letters or making statements in audiences and those things. Those are something that's called part of the Pope's ordinary magisterium. And that's something that requires of us what the Church says a religious submission of our intellect and will. And that doesn't mean that we have to hold what the Pope says or we have to believe what the Pope says in those contexts, but that we have to sort of be deferential to the Pope's teaching in those ways as a father, as a pastor, that we have to be kind of be willing to consider in a serious way in our mind and in our hearts what it is that the Pope is saying, even when he's speaking sort of just as the Bishop of Rome, not just, but in this ordinary way. And then there are times when the Pope is clearly speaking in a way in which he doesn't intend to exercise any official capacity at all. When he gives an interview to a newspaper reporter, when he makes the Pope I've seen lately has been making videos, to post on Facebook. Sorry again to that first guy, but videos again to post on Facebook about various things that are not intended, to be an authoritative act of his magisterium, extraordinary or ordinary, and so those things, and those are often the times when the Pope's at a press conference on an airplane, for example. Those are often the times when the Pope is sort of most frequently seen to be causing confusion with his words, or when people seem to be most frequently confused or scandalized or something like that, when the Pope is sort of speaking off the cuff. And the good thing about those is that we can recognize that the Pope is a man who occupies an office, and that office is protected in particular ways by the Holy Spirit at particular times. But that doesn't mean that every word that comes out of the Pope's mouth is infallible or protected by the Holy Spirit, or is even intended to be, or the Pope even intends it to be. And so we can sort of make a differentiation between Pope Francis the man and Pope Francis in various kinds of official exercises of his office.
Chris,
I hope that helps a little.
And if you'll hang on the line, I'd like to send you a copy of Jimmy Akin's book, Teaching with Authority, in which Jimmy breaks it all down for you in a very helpful way. And you can review it there whenever you'd like. If you would like that book, hang on the line, and we'll send it to you. Teaching with Authority, Jimmy Akin's book on how to understand the different levels of authoritative teaching in the Catholic Church. Our number is 888-318-7884. Our guest is J.D. Flynn from PillarCatholic.com. That's the Pillar, and they write about Catholic news. So if you've got a question about the church and the news, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884. Going to South Alabama now, listening to EWTN on Channel 130, Sirius XM satellite radio is David in South Alabama. David, go ahead with your question for J.D.
Thank you for taking my call. And Mr. Flynn, I want to thank you for the website you put together. The Pillar website is extremely informative.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Hey, thanks.
Your website was the only place I was able to find the actual copy of the Cardinal Laudaria's letter to Archbishop Gomez regarding the Eucharist. And in reading it, my recollection was as a reference to a letter that Cardinal Ratzinger, I guess Pope Emeritus now, but Cardinal Ratzinger wrote to Archbishop McCarrick, or I guess he's no longer a priest, but and it appears to have given him specific guidance, McCarrick specific guidance as to, the who should be able to receive communion in the context of a politician who was affirmatively advocating abortion. And so I'm curious whether that letter that Cardinal Ratzinger sent to McCarrick we would be able to take a look at that on your website.
Well, David, that's a great question. Thank you. I haven't published it on my website, and I'll tell you why. I don't have it. I have seen the first person who I'm aware who published what I think to be the whole of that memo is the great Vaticanist Sandro Magister, who who writes for an Italian publication called Chiesa. My Italian is crappy. Anyway, he writes for this Chiesa, and Sandro Magister published back in 2004 in English, in fact, the Ratzinger letter to Cardinal McCarrick, which really takes the form of a memo. There's no sort of salutation or closing or anything like that. Just I think I want to say 6 points and a sort of proviso at the end, really. And so Magister published it, and I think a few people have published it subsequently. But I've always wanted, I'll tell you the truth, I've always wanted to see it on letterhead. And the reason for that is because I believe that these points are the whole of the thing. But there's this curious part of the Laudaria letter, maybe you picked up on it too, where Laudaria says, he says, wanting to honor Cardinal Ratzinger's inclination to not publish to not publish his letter to McCarrick, and he seems to be quoting from Ratzinger in some way, where he says that the letter was not to be published. But I've never seen that quote from Cardinal Laudaria, so I don't know if that's in the original version of the letter or not. I've always been curious about that, and it's a real curiosity, and that's part of the reason I think why I've probably never published the full text. But that letter, certainly Laudaria references and says, that letter from Ratzinger to McCarrick, which is intended to give guidance on the principles related to the admission of pro-choice politicians to Holy Communion, should guide the bishops. Laudaria is clear about that. He says you should read it in light of other guidance that's come from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and you should take it under advisement under those auspices. But he doesn't say they shouldn't use it. In fact, on the contrary, he says they should take it under consideration. So it is, I think, an important piece of guidance from Cardinal Ratzinger, who became Benedict XVI, and in my own sort of thought as a canon lawyer and as a journalist, it seems consistent with what the CDF said just before that in 2002, and what the Church said in 1983 in the promulgation of the Code of Canon Law, and in what the bishops of Latin America said in their Aparecida document, and in so many other places where this topic has been taken up, that McCarrick letter seems to be kind of consistent, the Ratzinger letter seems to be kind of consistent with what the Church has said at the universal level and at local levels too. So I hope that it is. I hope that the bishops do sort of take it under advisement, because that seems to be what Cardinal Laudaria is calling for here.
Excuse me, that was David in South Alabama. I'm very glad you called and asked that question, because I didn't realize that, JD, that these were private communications, or maybe not private, but professional anyways, communications between the Vatican and bishops, and that they're not just, you can't just go to the Vatican website and see what Cardinal Ratzinger wrote before he was Pope Benedict.
Yeah. In fact, arguably, I'd say Cardinal Laddara is probably not too pleased that we published his letter to Archbishop Gomez of last week. We certainly didn't ask anybody's permission before we put it on the internet. The thing about 2004 is people were just less likely to be putting things on the internet, as it were, right? So we don't have it with letterhead or something like that. But that was a piece of private communication. And what was supposed to happen is that McCarrick got it from Ratzinger because McCarrick had written to Ratzinger saying, give us some guidance on this. And it's widely understood that McCarrick was supposed to then explain that guidance and share that letter with the U.S. bishops, which he didn't do. He gave them a very brief summary of it, and then they sort of moved on and said, well, the diocesan bishops will handle this. So it's there has always been sort of question about why that wasn't more widely promulgated, and Laddara himself kind of hints at that, which has been, just as a matter of curiosity, something I myself would like to sort of be able to unravel a little bit better.
David, thank you. We have to take a break. There are more folks on the line for J.D. Flynn. We're talking about the church in the news. Just questions for J.D. about the news that the church is involved in around the world. I'm not going to let this hour end without asking you again about the German bishops. So I'm going to get to as many callers as I can, but there is at least one German bishop question coming for you. And before I send you off to the break, most of what you've heard about the Crusades and the Inquisition, it's probably not true. There's a whole lot of myth and biased information about the Crusades and the Inquisitions. That's why we've got a free ebook for you this month, The Real Story of the Crusades and the Inquisition. Get your copy today at shop.catholic.com. Just look for the button at the top of the page, shop.catholic.com.
Let us help you with your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
He is honored by the Church as a saint with the title of the Angelic Doctor.
Matthew Bunson and the Doctors of the Church.
St. Thomas Aquinas wrote a basic textbook for young theology students that became the Church's most famous guide to the faith, the Summa Theologica. It helped him earn the title Doctor of the Church. He died in 1274.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
We have a big problem. Our culture is dying, and souls are in danger of being lost. The answer is conversion to Jesus Christ in His church. St. Paul Street Evangelization is a Catholic organization, and we have hundreds of teams spreading the good news throughout the country. But we need your help. The harvest is great, but the laborers are few. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. We really could do this for 2 hours because it's fascinating always to hear a bit of an insider's take on the church in the news. Hardworking journalist J.D. Flynn, the founder and the editor-in-chief of The Pillar. You can find it at pillarcatholic.com. Pillar Catholic. And you've already heard some of our callers endorsing the work they do over there.
That's great.
Yeah, lots of folks on the line for you, Admiral. So I'm just going to keep going back to the phones. Denver, Colorado. John in Denver, Colorado, listening on 1060 AM. You are up next. Go ahead, John, with your question for J.D. Flynn.
Hi, Mr. Flynn. This is any news you hear whether these pro-abortion politicians should go to communion and everything. And I think we're giving our questions or answers or arguments at a natural level, you know. And I'm with Father Altman, who says the Democratic platform all the way down is to promote mortal sin. And I'm saying, we can't dump more sins on Christ crucified. We're dealing with God and His mercy and judgment. So I'm not sure when mercy will end. I think we're in mercy time right now. And I don't know when judgment time will come along, but we can't dump 60 million aborted babies while He's on a cross. That is horrendous for me to think about that. And we just don't care about God, and we're talking about Code Canon 915 this year. Let's discuss this here. Let's talk about God's judgment. What do you think? Am I
Well, John, thank you for asking, and I'm from Denver too, so good to talk to a neighbor, I suppose. Thank you for asking. John, I think this is a question that a lot of people have been asking lately, and a lot of people have been talking about lately. And first of all, please let me say that the scourge, the shame, the evil, the horror of abortion is our country's national shame, and I think that we all will be asked at our own judgment what we did to end abortion, to be sure, and without any question. Legal protection for abortion is a grave evil. I mean, there's no doubt about that. There's no way around that, and no one should deny that, or can, I think, reasonably deny that. The questions of how we vote are the church says. I mean, at the end of the day, the church herself teaches that the questions about how we vote are not as always clear-cut as that, because there are questions about sort of making proportional judgments at different times, and the church has said it is not our job to teach people, to tell people who to vote for, rather to teach them how to vote. And Catholics have to make judgments about whether or not there is a proportionate, there are proportionate reasons to vote for particular people in particular races, and that has to do with a lot of things. I think if you lived in, let's say, New York City, Cardinal Dulles used to say this. If he lived in New York City, he said if he didn't vote for a Democrat in the city council election, there'd be nobody for him to vote for, because everybody running was a Democrat. And so he had to choose between these options, none of whom were good, but all of whom were the ones that were available to him. And there are different ways in which that's true in different kind of elections too. The church says we can never vote for someone because of their stance in favor of legal protection for abortion, and that if we're going to vote against that stance for legal protection of if we're going to vote for someone who has a stance for legal protection for abortion, we need to have a proportionate reason for it. I can only speak for myself, John. I can say that I've not found in a national election, a federal election, a proportionate reason to vote for someone who supports legal protection for abortion that is equivalent to the national scourge and shame and evil of abortion. For myself, I can say that the church says that that's something that each Catholic has to make a judgment about, and she provides guidance about that. And I can say for myself, in a federal election, I have not found anything that contributes to that. But I think we do have to judge each election sort of on its own merits, because when I make a judgment about sort of city council here in Jefferson County, those are not, there are a different set of issues at play. The city council members have different levels of authority on different things. And then again, I have to sort of say, what is their authority on the things that are in their purview? And that's what the church says. We have to make sort of different deliberations at the question of each election. I know that a lot of people don't like that answer because it seems like a squishy answer, or it means you're not pro-life or something like that. I get it. But I think the truth is, the church says some things are complex, and we have to weigh that complexity, and we have to form our own consciences to weigh that complexity. Again, for myself, I have never seen it reasonable or possible to find a proportionate reason to vote for someone who supports legal protection for abortion in a congressional race or a senatorial race or for president or something like that. But who that means who's left, and how we make choices about who we vote for after that, or whether we vote, or how we vote in other elections, all of those things require honest discernments and conscience. And that's I don't think that's a squishy answer. I just think it means the Christian life in a modern democracy is an incredibly difficult prospect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think when we spoke with Archbishop Cordileone a couple of weeks ago about his work in the Archdiocese of San Francisco with his new pastoral letter, he was making a point similar to what John made, in that he was saying, we do need to talk about mortal sin, and we have to get people to understand what the Eucharist is again, and why you don't receive the Eucharist in a state of mortal sin. And I do think the bishops have their work cut out for them there. I mean, many Catholics don't believe in the real presence of Christ, so they don't believe the fundamental teaching of the Church on the Eucharist, and they don't really believe in sin anymore. So it's all kind of a free-for-all if you have that mentality. And the bishops do have a lot of work to do there.
And sometimes I think we sort of even stop there. We say, well, don't receive the Eucharist in a state of mortal sin, when the real message of the Lord is stop sinning and grace can help you. You can be better than sin, right? It's not sort of be mired in your sinfulness and don't receive the Eucharist, but you can do it by virtue of the cross and resurrection. And I think that's the message. But man, these voting questions can become so, the church tells us we have to make judgments about these things, and that's hard, and they can become so divisive as a consequence of that. That's not an easy thing.
Back in the 1930s, Eugenio Pacelli, who became Pope Pius XII, negotiated an agreement with Adolf Hitler called the Reichskonkordat. And why is the Reichskonkordat still important today?
Well, the Reichskonkordat, which was indeed negotiated between the Holy See and the Germany when it was under Nazi rule, is still the operative treaty between the nation of Germany and the Holy See, and it delineates a lot of things, including kind of the way in which the Catholic Church is recognized in civil law in Germany. It's interesting right now because there's been a lot of talk about the German bishops and the possibility of schism, and a bishop who is in schism loses the right to exercise his office as bishop anymore. And I've wondered what would happen if the Church said a bishop was in schism. Would he still be recognized by German civil authorities as kind of being the bishop and, kind of heading the diocese as a civil corporation? Would he still be able to administer the tax money that German Catholic churches get? German Catholic churches are funded by kind of an income tax that the government collects and passes on to them, and it's worth billions of dollars. Well, it turns out that the Reichskonkordat actually spells out that the German government recognizes as the legitimate bishop of a diocese the person who the church says is in charge of the diocese. So the German government doesn't see any difference between sort of this recognizing the church in civil law and the church's understanding of herself in canon law, which is not true for us in the United States. You live in San Diego. The Bishop of San Diego is both canonically the Bishop of San Diego, and he also heads some civil corporation called the Bishop of San Diego, a California nonprofit corporation, or however it's organized. And so he has these two jobs. And if he lost the job of Bishop of San Diego, he'd have to formally resign that other job. It's not as if the state of California is going to ask the Pope who's in charge of that nonprofit corporation. But in Germany, it's different. And the reason for that is this Concordat, which kind of has a very odd historical curiosity, was established in a very controversial way in the 1930s between the Holy See and the Third Reich, and subsequently, the church condemned Nazism, but many people said they never should have signed that Concordat, and that the German government wasn't negotiating in good faith, and it was a hugely historical, controversial moment. At the same time, the treaty is still in force, which is sort of fascinating, it seems to me at least, and could impact the question of what would happen if a German bishop were found to be in schism.
I think the church was wise to negotiate it and sign it. I mean, it's obvious. I mean, Adolf Hitler used treaties to buy time for when he would attack you the next time. That's what he did to everybody. Certainly what he did to the Russians and the Poles and the Czechs and the. But I mean, the wisdom of it is shown today in that you had to make a deal with Mussolini because Mussolini was the head of Italy. You had to make a deal with Hitler because Hitler was the head of Germany. There wasn't somebody else to make a deal with. And they made deals that were better than having no deal at all.
It's a very interesting question, and that's the argument. The argument that you're making is the argument that the Vatican Secretary of State is making about its deal right now with Beijing. Yeah. And there are people who say, yeah, but you don't negotiate with Beijing because Beijing doesn't regard its negotiation in good faith, and Christians are still being persecuted, and Beijing won't actually do the things it said it was supposed to do. And then there are people who say, yeah, but you have to do what you can to protect the rights of the church.
You do.
And there's no perfect situation. So it's a really interesting question, I think, for sure.
If popes twice negotiated with Attila the Hun, I think that sets a precedence. You have to negotiate who's got the sword because we don't have a sword.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We don't have a sword, and if we did, we'd be beating it into a plowshare or something. So lots of luck that's going to do for us.
J.D. Flynn is not only the founder but also the editor-in-chief at The Pillar. You can find it at pillarcatholic.com, pillarcatholic.com. And I recommend that you do so. I'm just going to share a question with you because there's not enough time to get more people on the phone, but this is coming from Pat in Canada, listening on Alexa. Why is Mr. McCarrick not in jail for the abuse of his crimes?
Got to ask the prosecutor of the state of New York. It seems most likely, or New Jersey, it seems most likely it's because the crimes that he committed from the civil law extended past the statute of limitations, so he can't be tried for them. The church waived the statute of limitations. The church said, actually, yes, the canonical statute of limitations expired, but we're going to waive that and try him anyway because these things are so egregious and so critical to the integrity of the church. The criminal the criminal jurisdictions under which he committed these crimes have criminal statutes of limitations, and he hasn't been tried for that reason. It's up to the prosecutors of those places and the laws of those places.
In the United States, though,
it's not up to the prosecutors.
Yeah, you can't change a criminal because that would be an ex post facto, and that's against the United States Constitution.
So it's not up to the prosecutors, right? Yeah, it's up to the law. Yeah, exactly. There's nothing you can do. Yeah,
but in a civil proceeding they could, but not in a criminal proceeding.
Right. That's right.
So thanks, Pat, very much for the question. I'm sorry, there's so many people we didn't get you on with JD, but that just tells us we need to have him on more often. Will you come back and do this more with us, JD? Good.
Yeah, you bet.
We love having you, Admiral. Enjoy your sail. Are you going out sailing now, or
going out for a little patrol sail? You got it.
Okay, patrol around The rolling hills of Nebraska. Good. I hope you enjoy that. Coming up next, Trent Horn's going to be here, and it's always great when we get to have conversations between Trent Horn and atheists. If you're an atheist person and you want to explain your atheism, if you want to have a conversation with folks we love conversation, but we don't hide the fact that we believe in God, we believe in the triune God, we believe that the second person of that Trinity, Jesus of Nazareth, is the Son of God. All that, we believe, we don't hide it, but we love talking about it. If you're an atheist, 888-318-7884.